10:01, let's rock and roll. Welcome to the Hammerdown Podcast, where we put the pedal to the metal and talk trends, tech, and tunes. Today, I have an absolute legend in the business on the podcast today. John Lynn, the founder of Healthcare Scene and Healthcare IT Today. John, how the heck are you today?
Good. I just hope I'm part of the Hall of Fame of Tech Tunes broadcast.
Could be, our viewership's grown. We've got a lot of great followers, and appreciate you coming on the podcast. Listen, John, why don't you give us a little background and bio of what you do? And I know you're like the most popular guy in healthcare content, so give us a little background of how you got started and what you do.
Yeah, so I was working at UNLV in their health and counseling center. I implemented their electronic medical record, got bored on a weekend. What does a tech guy do on a weekend when you're bored? I built the website about EMR. I was really learning search engine optimization. I figured it was a good resume builder. I wanted to be on the first page of Google for EMR, and I did that within a few months. And then, there's a lot more to this story because that was about 18 years ago. Quit the day job 14 years ago, been full-time blogging, podcasting, conferences. Healthcare IT Today now has 17,000 articles that we've published. We have 3 podcasts with 600-700 episodes. I don't know, I lose track. About 200,000 in our community. So just done a ton of health IT content for a long time, which just means I'm old. And then we also do have our marketing community, Swaay.Health. That's Swaay with 2 A's, .health, which is a healthcare marketing community, B2B marketers and marketers at provider hospitals, health systems. So we do publications there, conferences. So anything healthcare IT or healthcare marketing is basically where I live, breathe, eat, sleep, probably to my wife's chagrin.
Well, hey, I'm a big fan of what you do. I do glean from you and a couple other sources, a lot of the, front of the line, cutting edge, what's really coming out. And you've always got interesting guests. And, I've yelled at you at the trade show. I'm like, John, you're like, dude, who are you? I'm like, Hammerdown, bro. And you're like, okay. I appreciate you being on. You always have great content, and I look forward to catching up a couple weeks at HIMSS. Let's hit it today. One of the things we talked about being in the community is, our podcast is Trends, Tech, and Tunes. The trend today is automated EHR documentation. And I think this is interesting when you talk about 18 years ago at UNLV building out the EMR. I always like to say everybody's young enough to remember the records room and filing cabinets. But John,
we still have them.
We still got them, and most people are getting out of that. But I'd love to hear your perspective on over the last 15 years in healthcare digitization. Why is this such a huge breakthrough?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I actually wrote about what now is called ambient clinical voice, or as you like to call it, which I think is appropriate, automated EHR documentation, which is what ambient clinical voice is. But, I actually wrote an article in 2006. I said, we need a video EHR. The doctor walks in the room, sees the patient, everything's recorded, video and audio. We use NLP to identify everything, and they walk out and the documentation's done. Mm-hmm. So that is essentially what ambient clinical voice was. The only thing I got wrong was, turns out we don't need the video, and there's risk with videos there. So, so we knew this technology was coming for a long time. But I think what's happened is with large language models, it's actually, possible to do it in a really complete way. But here's the reason we really need it and why it's such a breakthrough. When we implemented EHRs, unlike most technology, we implemented it to address billing, to be able to help us bill better, faster. And it did that. What we didn't do is we didn't do it to make the life of the clinician easier. We didn't do it to make the patient care better. We didn't implement EHRs. In fact, when we implemented EHRs, we said, oh, this is a great opportunity to get even more data. And so when we implemented EHRs, we burnt everyone out because in the process of doing it, we said, oh, to do billing more effectively, we need more data. And when you guys are going to be the data entry clerks for this within the EHR. And so when they look at it and you say, EHRs burnt everyone out, that's kind of true. But it's true because we said, hey, we want you to do more than what you did previously in a paper chart. And so that's why, I often said this. I said, hey, if Epic wants to make an impact on usability, They should spend more money lobbying in Washington to be able to simplify the reimbursement and regulatory requirements of doctors, because the HR reflects those requirements. Well, fast forward to Ambient Clinical Voice. What does it do? It satisfies all of those data needs that people want. I mean, the government wants the data, the payers want the data, the organizations want the data. That's not going back. We're not going backwards, right? But so they need that data. But how do we make it so that the experience of the doctor is better so they can focus on the patient while still collecting the data? And the answer to that question, I think, is going to be Ambient Clinical Voice, which, for those not familiar, you walk into the room, most of them are on, your phone, you click record, and then you say, hey, we're going to record this. Is that okay? The patient says yes. They set it down, whatever, they put it in their pocket, and then they see the patient. And then when they walk out of the room, the note's done and ready. They just have to review it. So that's the power of it. And that's changing the experience for the doctors. It's still a little early, but it's there, and people are using it for thousands and thousands of visits.
No, and that's amazing, Jed. And one of the things that we see, because we're a data company and a data analytics company, we talk to a lot of customers, and what you're talking about, physician burnout. Everybody wants to identify that and get in front of it and look at all the data points of what's driving that. But the EHR documentation, then talk about staff downstream. If you were on, you started on the IT side of the shop, everybody's on deadline to get something done to make the Epic go live, and then the next go live, and then the upgrade, and all of the things that go into the Epic environment to support the hospital. So if we could reduce that burnout, I think this is pretty cool with Ambient Clinical Voice. What are some of the keys, John, that the provider space to be prepared to use Ambient Clinical Voice? Because some of what we've seen, and this is like when Microsoft says 97% of healthcare data is not being utilized, how can someone that wants to drive this forward to support the clinicians, how do they get prepared for this?
Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting, that the nice thing with Ambient Clinical Voice is the vendors are doing most of the lift. Like they like I ask them, I've done interviews with almost all of them, and I ask them, what's the onboarding process? They're like, they click record and then they see the patient. And I'm like, well, they have to learn some stuff. Yeah, well, they have to articulate things that they're thinking, and seeing. So they have to vocalize that. But other than that, there's not a lot of training. But here's what I would say, and there's a lot of them taking a lot of different approaches. Some of them are actually using your data to inform the Ambient Clinical Voice, the AI technology behind it. So if you have bad data, then you need to address that, right? Because if they're using that bad data to document the visits, then we know crap in, crap out, right? Like that's how it works with data. So, that's one thing, is making sure you have good data. And this is going to be even more true as this AI assistant evolves from just Ambient Clinical Voice that documents the visit to then also being the interface with the doctor. Like I predict that many doctors, the interface will be this Ambient Clinical Voice AI solution where they say, hey, give me the last 3 lab results. And if your data is bad, then it's not going to be any good in the Ambient Voice solution either. So I think that's one. Let's start with the data and make sure your data is good and that you're collecting it the right way. You have good templates or whatever it is that, however you're documenting today, because it's going to leverage those templates, right? I mean, I just interviewed the leader in this. It's integrated with Epic, and they said, yeah, we're using the smart data elements and we're using your existing forms. So it's leveraging what you've already done. So make sure you implement that in the right way. The other one I think is we're all averse to change, right? Like nobody wants to change, but if we prep them for what's coming and we help them understand what's going to be possible, then the clinicians will be more able to change once you decide to roll that out. And so helping them understand the evolution, because unfortunately many were burnt out by Dragon voice recognition. Right. That, hey, I tried it, well, it's like 80% accurate, I gotta train it, I gotta do all, like it was, of course they overcame all that and now it's 98% out of the box and all, whatever, right? But the experience for clinicians, they got burnt, right? And so we need to educate them on how far the technology has come so that they're ready to accept a technology like this. Otherwise, all of these past preconceptions and experiences with technology are going to cloud them actually choosing to adopt it.
Yeah, and the interesting transition on that is you see a lot of folks using, Siri or some sort of dictation on their phone to send text, and how it's gotten more accurate over 5 years. So the transitive property of simplicity will probably drive some level of adoption and reduce that burnout, because if you have to go back, I hate going back. I don't have a reverse gear to pick up a dime or anything. So, I understand a physician when they do 30, 40, 50 visits a day and they've got to go back and review all of them because they're only 80% accurate. Those are the burnout details of going through and combing through all that data. So
But that's the thing is
interesting.
most of these solutions now are in that 95%. All of them are going to get into
Mhm.
that 97% range, right? So that's actually not going to be a differentiator. People aren't going to choose an ambient clinical voice based on the quality because they're all going to be in that 97. And you can't tell 96 versus 97. Like a human can't really tell the difference. So, all of them are going to be, we're not at the 80%. You're not having to change
Right.
massive swaths of it. You're tweaking small things, adding in something that maybe needed, tweaking something. So it's a big, mindset shift that's happened, and that is, the quality is just so much better.
Yeah. And so, John, normally I break it up into trends, tech, and tunes, but we've kind of overlapped them. So I'm going to ask the hardest question on the technology for ambient clinical voice. When a provider is going through this journey, because you have the early adopters and you have mainstream and the laggards. What are some of the early adopters? What are the mistakes they should look out for to avoid so they have success?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. One time I was really wanting a feature from my EHR, right? And they'd implemented
Mhm.
it. And I just rolled it out. I was the beta site, right? Like I just went head on and I said, yeah, we've been waiting for this. You finally developed it. Let's do it. We roll it out. It turns out it was full of memory leaks. And
Ooh.
so in the morning, everything was going good. As the day went on, 2 hours later, the memory leaks were just sucking the memory off the server. And it would just go so slow, it was unusable. And I'd like reboot the server and then it would work for another, then a couple hours later, just the memory leaks. And I learned an important lesson. I was like, oh, you want to be on the cutting edge, but maybe not the bleeding edge, because then you're bleeding. And so, it's an interesting balance that we have there, right? But here's what I would also say is if you're not testing out ambient clinical voice with your clinicians, which of course are the key stakeholders in this, then you're not going to be ready for what's happening. You're not going to see the evolution of what's happening. So to me, it's critical that you're trying it. Now, it's a challenge right now. It's actually the same challenge we had during the EHR adoption.
Mhm.
There were so many choices. So people when I started writing about EHR, they were like, should we implement EMR? It was EMR, not EHR at the time. And then
Mhm.
they moved to, okay, we know we should do it, but which one should we do? Right. And then we went eventually, then they gave $36 billion of stimulus in the golden age of EHR, and everyone went crazy. Right. But, like we were in that same kind of process, right? People were like, well, should I do ambient clinical voice? To now, like, okay, I know I should do it. Which one should I do? Right. And so I think that's going to be the next step in this. And the key question I think people are going to ask, and I think what will be the differentiator between the various solutions is how they integrate with the EHR. Because the doctor still has to have all that data go into the EHR, and how they choose to integrate with it and how deeply they integrate it with it. I think that's going to be the biggest point of differentiation between various solutions.
No, and that's great context, John. And it's funny that you talk about being an early adopter and having all the problems and having to triage all that. And the maturity is definitely coming here. So if you're not, it's kind of like the media. If you don't get the resources, it's not a true story. So, I'm sure if somebody's going to evaluate this and talk to three people that are going to integrate with the EMR or EHR, maybe flashback to 2008, John, with the EMR comment, but
Is that a good or bad memory?
it was good. I mean, it's the .com run up and the because I was on the partner side, but yeah, the .com run up, and I ran into a guy that is in healthcare now that was in the .com run up and said we got battle hardened to the .com run up to be able to brace for the EMR and Epic and meaningful use and making sure that we had everything for these complex, crazy rollouts that were under the gun to make the deadlines that somebody else imposed. Right, IT is always the last to know, so.
Yeah, for sure. It was crazy. It was fun though.
It was fun. It was fun. I'm glad I did it when I was younger. I'll tell you that. Say when you get older, you have a little bit less energy. But yeah, John, I look forward to catching up at HIMSS. What if somebody wants to get a hold of you because you have so many different venues to get the message out? If they've got an interesting story on the provider or partner side, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, I like to say if you can't find me, you didn't try. So, I think I'm 5 of the top 10 searches for John Lynn. So that's easy. But, if you go to healthcareittoday.com, hit the contact us form, it'll hit me up, or Swaay.Health as well. Either way, happy to connect with people. I'm Tech Guy on Twitter too. So, I was early into Twitter. I got the nice handle Tech Guy. So I'm going to keep that until X disappears.
Yeah, well, it's growing viewership and members and accounts by the day, so I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. So,
I don't think so
um,
either.
so the whole the reason you volunteered to come on, this is like corporate Christmas for me. Let's talk tunes. I always let the guests pick the band, and you immediately said Faith Hill. John,
That's right.
give me some background on why you like Faith Hill. She's been super successful. We've had Mike McDermott on it. We're talking about Tim McGraw. So give me some of your why do you love Faith Hill?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you watch, Sunday Night Football, Faith Hill was better than Carrie Underwood. Let's put that out there. But no, I actually fell in love with Faith Hill in college. I didn't have cable growing up. I went to college, got into one of these apartments that had cable built in, and I discovered CMT. And then one weekend, they had an All About Faith weekend. I was glued to the TV. I was just like enamored by everything Faith Hill, her relationship with Tim, falling in love, the music, the everything, and just anyway. So I've just been in love with Faith Hill ever since. So that was the start back in college many decades ago.
Okay, well, yeah, it's super successful. You picked a good star to have as a lighthouse as a music aficionado, so that's awesome. Since you're the guest, John, why don't you give us a song that ties back into ambient clinical voice and updating the EHR?
Yeah, so I have a bunch, so hopefully we can make through a few. But yeah, I was thinking of the Pearl Harbor soundtrack. There you'll be. We talked about the golden age of EHR. I think that many people are still dreaming of that golden age of EHR. There's a line, in my dreams, I'll always see you soar above the sky. I think there's still some people still dreaming of that. And I don't know, maybe ambient clinical voice is going to be a similar moment without the stimulus. People will actually care about it. So here's two others that.
No, I'll go next. We'll go
Okay,
fantasy
go for it.
football
Yeah,
style.
yeah.
I'll take two. I did have in my dreams on there because it's every leader and every provider's dream to get that done. So I'm 100% on board with you. I've got
Okay.
two. Somebody that's an early adopter on this is the lucky one. Okay, so the
Mm.
lucky one was on my roster, and then breathe, because when this happens, if we reduce physician burnout, the physicians can breathe. So that was on my list. You said you got a whole slew
Interesting.
of them.
Well, I had Breathe paired with Let's Make Love,
Hmm.
which is the Tim McGraw Faith Hill duet, right? And it kind of feels like that's people's relationship with Epic.
Hmm.
They look into their eyes and they can't see anyone else, They can feel the magic floating in the air, right? Like they can't breathe because they're just so obsessed with Epic. So that was mine. But I'll give you a different one that uses more ambient clinical voice. Cry is an interesting one, right? Will you cry a little and lie just a little? Like it's just like, hey, see me, show some emotion that you care. To me, this is the clinician's anthem to administrators. Like, could you just cry a little? Could you show that you actually care? That you care about me, not the numbers? Like that I'm burnt out from all this, documentation burden, etc. So cry sounds like a clinician's anthem for administrators. But on the other side of that, though, I was thinking of the song This Kiss, one of her
Hmm.
most famous songs. To me, that's kind of the feeling that many have as they first use ambient clinical voice, right? It's like their
Hmm.
first kiss, right? Like it's this ethereal, like, wait, I can see the patient and not the screen. It's like that first kiss and that moment of just beauty and like, oh, that's why I got into medicine. That's what we hear from clinicians that are trying out ambient clinical voice.
No, and so I've got one since you had a huge long list. And most of the time somebody comes in with two or three, but I do prepare and have a long list. But I have someone else's dream because this is something that is almost mainstream commercially available. One of the tie-ins here at LifeScale, our firm does data and analytics, visualization, but many customers, have issues. Talk about burnout with chart bloat. You talk about all the different things that go into physician burnout and using that data, like uh, going back 3 visits and asking that ambient clinical voice and not bloating the chart with years worth of stuff. I think this is someone else's dream so that you can go in and efficiently talk to patients and documents. So on the same page, yeah. Do you have anything else on your roster, John?
Yeah, so here's two that maybe aren't ambient clinical voice, but I'll just throw them out there. Wild one. That
Mhm.
reminds me of the Health IT pros at HIMSS parties, right? A wild one with an angel face. So throw that one out there. And then, Mississippi Girl, classic, perfect for Faith Hill. Mississippi Girl, don't change her ways just because everybody knows her name. It's like the CIO, right? Does he
Yep.
change his ways? Does she change her ways? It'll be just because everybody knows their name. There you go. I think that's an interesting one. We probably see a little bit of both in the CIOs. Some that the power goes to the head, and some that stay humble and like the song says.
So, John, you're the only guest that's come on and sang. I've had repeat guests come back, but I'll give you credit. You're the only guest
I
that's come on
shouldn't
and sang.
sing, man. I did them wrong, but I can't resist.
Hey, I like to tell people I got a face for radio, but people tune into the podcast. So, all right, well, hey, John, ambient clinical voice, automated EHR documentation. It's an exciting time in healthcare again because there's some great things coming with this connecting to tech. Looking forward to catching up at him. Stop by our booth 2089. We're over by Epic, so it'll be good to catch up. Really appreciate you coming on the show, John, and thanks for all that you do for the healthcare industry.
Thanks for having me on, Jay. This was a lot of fun.